welcome into This Week in Indiana Football, a Friday edition. First ever Friday edition of This Week in Indiana Football. We are so glad that we are still able to bring this to you, even though it's a lot later than usual. Joining me, as always, Dustin Schuttin of Saturday Tradition. Also glad he could be here as well. We've had so many scheduling things going on that it's just been very difficult to find a way to record this for this week, but we are both very happy that we were able to find this hour right now to be able to go ahead and get this taken care of. And man, Dustin, how you doing?
I'm doing great. We had the college football playoff rankings. We had the Braves win the World Series. College basketball exhibition games are underway. So it was tough for us to get this nailed down, but we're able to do it. We persevered and we found a way.
Yeah, and your Atlanta Braves winning the World Series. You've had quite the week, my friend.
I did. It was exciting. I mean, I'm not going to pretend to be a lifelong fan, but it was exciting. I like to support the teams that I'm closest to, especially growing up in Indiana, not really having a baseball team. You always watched the Braves because they were always on TBS or TNT or whatever the channel was, TNN back in the day because of Turner. And now I get to watch them, throughout the summer, and it was fun. It was fun to watch that team, especially considering how much they struggled in the early portion of the season.
And another thing, too, that you mentioned, I'm glad you mentioned because I'd actually forgotten about this, the college football playoff rankings. And it didn't take long. It only took the very first one to get people talking, get people angry. And there's a lot of, I guess I would say, media members with clout that are really speaking out about the issues right now with the college football playoff. And I think a prime example that comes off the top of my head is Joel Klatt, because I think he explained it and tackled it the best, the way that the college football playoff rankings should be handled. And then that should be which teams are the most deserving, not necessarily who are the best teams.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you classify. I mean, there's always going to be some subjectivity when you don't have a specific set of criteria in terms of winning your conference championship or, getting a certain number of wins or whatever the case might be. But the thing that's always annoyed me is when they say, well, Alabama may not have the wins, but they're one of the four best, or Ohio State may not have the wins or, the strength of schedule, but, they look like one of the four best teams. Well, when you do that, then let's just look at the recruiting rankings and throw everything out the window, because that's essentially what you're saying, that the results don't matter. The one thing I was happy to see, I think Alabama at 2 is egregious. You could probably make a case that Ohio State at number 5, when you look at the strength of schedule and the fact that currently they haven't beaten anybody in the top 25, Ohio State might be a little too high. I mean, even Cincinnati, they got 100. Their strength of schedule is ranked like 100th, but they at least have that one win over Notre Dame. So, to me, it was very frustrating just because it doesn't seem to make any sense whatsoever in how they rank teams. All we really care about is probably the top 10 right now. So it doesn't matter when you look down the list. But to me, look, the thing that's crazy is you look, the SEC had the highest ranked 0 loss, 1 loss, 2 loss, and 3 loss team. I mean, Mississippi State hasn't been in a poll, I don't think, all year in the AP or coaches poll. I could be wrong on that.
And that's one I mentioned to you last week. Sorry to cut you off, but I made this point last week about the rankings, how I feel like the committee doesn't even pay attention to what's been going on in the AP poll or the coaches poll all season, because you end up seeing outlandish things like that in the first rankings they put out.
Right. And it's really interesting how they justified. It doesn't make any sense. Like, if you're going to have Mississippi State ranked, then, and I don't know, off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you who they've beaten. I think they got beat by Memphis. Like, that's not a good football team. But when you look, legitimately, I'm just going to throw this out as an example, but Mississippi State is 5-3. They got boat raced by Alabama, which a lot of teams do. They're sitting at 17, I believe. You can make the argument that based on that, Purdue deserves to be ranked. They're 5-3. They've got a ranked win. Their losses are to a ranked Notre Dame, a ranked Minnesota, and a ranked Wisconsin. They beat number 21 or 22 Iowa. Like what are we judging? Like, what are we judging this on? There's so much inconsistency from the 1 through 10, from then 11 through 25, and then so on and so forth. It just makes absolutely no sense.
Nobody. And that's why I hate I hate that they wait so late into the college football season to put these rankings out if they're going to do it their own little committee way, because for 2/3 of the season, you have no idea what these people have been talking about or if they've even been having conversations. If you're going to have the college football playoff rankings be the end-all be-all for who wins the national championship, who's in these New Year's Six games, then why not have your own poll from the get-go, and that's the only one you pay attention to?
See, I would almost go the other way on that. I think in an ideal world, I would have the first playoff rankings released the week before rivalry week. The second comes out the week before the conference championship week. And then the final one comes out, the final one would come out then days later, like the Sunday or whatever, after the conference championship games. Because in my opinion, at that point, we have the full body of work. Like, as frustrating as it was, and I hate that I get this worked up about it because we still have a month left of the season. We still have some teams are going to play between 3 and 5 games.
Mm-hmm.
What we see now in all the scenarios we're painting out, all 14,000 of them, none of them are going to play out the way we're talking about. So it's probably, at the end of the day, it's going to work itself out. There might be one team that you could make an argument for, like, UCF back in 2017, Ohio State in 2018. There's usually that one team, but it's why I get so frustrated with myself, because these rankings don't matter. So it's just, all it is a money grab. I mean, I hate to say that, but that's what it is. It's a money grab to get attention on everybody's watching.
Mm-hmm.
You'll
see these when we do. That's the best part.
Exactly.
Whenever they come and act as if they haven't. I mean, maybe they haven't seen them, but I mean, it's such a show. It's like reality television.
Right. It is. And it works. I mean, it works on me. Every time it works on me. I think there was maybe it was last year where I didn't have much of an issue with most of the rankings, except for where teams like Iowa and Indiana ranked. But at the same time, I mean, it works. They know what sells, and they continue to do it. So I don't know why.
The only time that I feel like I was on board with a lot of what they were doing was when the year LSU won. I guess that would have been 2 years ago. And I guess you can kind of say the same thing right now. Georgia's kind of that dominant team, but LSU was clearly the top team in college football that year, and it wasn't even close. So I don't know. I hope something changes over the years. I don't know what's going to happen. It may be even more ridiculous when they have this 18 playoff or 12, whatever it ends up being in a couple of years. But we'll go ahead and put that to bed right now. I'm sure every week from here on out we'll have plenty to say about what's wrong with the college football playoff rankings. But
we will.
Yeah. Let's go. I want to move on before we get into talking some Indiana football. Let's take a look at Dustin's. We haven't done this before. He's been putting these out weekly on Saturday tradition for the past month, I believe. It's his new, and I don't want to, it's not a column. That seems like a degrade. Is it a column?
No,
okay.
It's a column.
His new column called Schuttin from the Hip. And we were talking about this before we got started. I love the image you see when you're on his site. He's got, he's facing sideways. It's kind of like the Drake album, Nothing Was the Same. But he's got a power. There you go. His power drill right there that you see. A power drill at his hip in place of a gun, obviously. And so it's a pretty hilarious image, in my opinion. But got a couple. I don't think these are necessarily hot takes. Before we get into this, what is the primary, I guess, goal of these articles?
So, I was just kind of having some fun with it and, just trying to work some things out this year and see what might work best. And so what I try to do is, our site does a really good job of covering all 14 teams. So one of the things I do is for my big feature section, for that top section, what I try to do is think about things that happen through the week or the biggest storylines heading into the Big Ten that maybe we haven't touched on, right? Like, last week, it was about the 3-team race in the Big Ten West between Iowa, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. And the biggest story was easily Ohio State, Penn State, or Michigan State, right? But at the same time, we hammered those topics. So I wanted to, I want to get a fresh take. I want to hit some of those other fan bases, some of those other teams. And ironically, I wrote about Minnesota for a second straight week. But so that's my first section is usually the thing to me, the biggest storyline that maybe we haven't paid much attention to in the Big Ten over the course of the last week. That second section is usually a rant section. It wasn't so much this week because there wasn't a lot to rant about. I'd already ranted about the college football playoff rankings in my 5 takeaways, and there wasn't a coach to rip or anything like that. Third is what I like to call coach speak, and I usually take the most notable or one of the most notable quotes from one of the coaches across the Big Ten. It's ranged from everything from Tom Allen, kind of ripping on the officials, to Brett Bielema throwing his players under, or what we thought was throwing his players on the bus. They went out and beat Penn State, so I was dead wrong on that. Mm-hmm. Mike Loxley talking about we want full membership in the Big Ten, so we don't have to play Friday night games. And then the last 2, I do a quick little blurb on each game in the Big Ten called the quick draws.
Quick draws, yeah, I see them.
And then the safety, like the safety lock on a gun, and and that's usually an over under or a line I really like. And this week it's I like Illinois to cover the 14.5 point spread against Minnesota, not to win the game, but just to. I think Minnesota wins, but by less than 14.5, or basically less.
Illinois is one of those, kind of like Purdue. You really don't know what you're going to get out of them.
Yeah,
sometimes they might beat a top 10 or top 5 team. Other times they'll lay an egg to somebody they should be taking care of business with. But going to your coach speak one, obviously we got Scott Frost here. I believe this is the quote you have here. I owe it to the kids to give them everything, give them my everything. So do the coaches, and we are. And the kids are giving us everything they got right back because of our relationship. I guess he's trying to speak to the culture at a time where it's starting to seem like, all the cards are on the deck right now with Ohio State coming into town this week. It's bowl eligibility or bust, and you have to keep that dream alive with likely one of the best teams in the Big Ten.
Yeah, and it's going to be tough. Even if they were to pull out a miracle win this weekend, you have to try to figure out a way to beat Wisconsin, who's playing really well, and then the Iowa game's a rivalry game that you haven't won, and gosh, was it 6 straight losses or something? Can't remember the exact number. I think it's 6. I was really, when you watch that press conference, there's been a lot of rumors about Scott Frost's job, and I don't think they're out of the blue, right? Like, we've said, and I said coming into the season, if Nebraska isn't bowl eligible, he's not going to be around. I don't know if I'm still I don't know if I still believe that quite as much. I think that 3-9, it's very much on the table. But when you also look at that schedule, and this is a much better team, even though they're not getting the wins, it's going to be interesting to me to see what Trev Alberts does. But in that presser, I thought Scott Frost seemed very comfortable. Maybe he knows the decision. I don't. Maybe he knows whether he's, hey, these are your final 3 games, or this is what the situation is, or, hey, you know what? Just go out and play hard and show the kids everything because you're going to be here next year. Let's get it turned around then. I don't know what the case might be, but he just seemed very comfortable, more comfortable than most times watching his press conferences, at least in my opinion. I watch these things through video. I'm not there. I don't get the vibe or the energy. But I thought that was a great thing for him to say with his players, knowing that there's all kinds of rumors. He has to try to block it out. He tries to ignore it. That's what he asks the kids to do. That's what he asks.
Do you hear the dog?
The dog.
So that's not, for those listening, that's not my dog. Our in-law, or my in-laws recently, they're staying with us temporarily, and their dog resides here in the office where I do sit here and produce Jim's show in the morning, and then where we do the podcast, and she is not happy to be in her crate right now. But unfortunately, there's not any other options right now. I'm the only person here at the house. So if you can hear that clearly coming through on the podcast, I apologize. Hopefully, who knows? This will likely be the only time that happens, but
well, you never,
because we also are recording this during the day. Normally we're doing this at night.
True. Yeah,
people are home. We're able to put the dogs outside. We have heard Lily barking outside before at who knows what, but man, we were talking about Scott Frost, and I was going to compare some real quick. It reminds me a lot, his situation. It reminds me of a lot of when Kevin Wilson was struggling to get to that bowl game with Indiana. The teams were good enough, but they were kind of shooting themselves in the foot, a lot like Nebraska's been doing all season. They're outgaining teams in some of these results. They're just not getting the wins, which is what ultimately matters. So there's that silver lining, I guess, where you could say that Scott Frost is this close, and so maybe you don't want to get rid of him that quick because maybe you're on the verge of making a bigger jump. And so that's kind of why you do you really want to start over at the end of the season, or do you want to wait it out one more year?
Exactly. And I think that the other factor in this is the fact that you've got a coaching turnover at LSU. You might have a coaching turnover at Florida. There seems to be a lot of pressure on Dan Mullen right now. We'll see how that plays out. You've got, I think, a total of 8. The coaching carousel is only going to heat up. So are you going to get the best candidate? Are you going to be able to lure your guy? Oh, I mean, there's a lot of factors in this. And to me, again, we've seen it. I think it's almost damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? And in this case, I don't know that there's going to be much harm in keeping Scott Frost around another year, because there have been positive signs that defense has played extraordinarily well. You eliminate some of these turnovers. I mean, it has legitimately been one play in this game, one play in that game. Like, they continue to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. That's a great phrase.
I don't know if that's become a cliche yet, but it's definitely become a very popular line to say.
Well, I'll give credit to Jeffrey the Greek and Big Kurt on the Eyes on Big podcast, because they use it all the time, and it's one of my favorite things to say now. But it's true. And I think you bring up a great point. Do you want to start over? And there's no guarantee. People thought not a lot of people, but some people thought Mike Riley was going to be the right fit. No. People thought Scott Frost would have this team competing for a college football playoff in 3 years. I wasn't one of those, by the way. I thought it would take more time to get to that level. Thought he'd be bowl eligible competing in the Big Ten West. So far, that hasn't happened. What happens if you fire him, you go a different route, and you get the same results? Like, I would give it one more year.
Before I shut the door on Nebraska, because this is not a Nebraska podcast, but there's just a lot always to talk about with them, especially this season.
It is the most interesting program in the Big Ten right now.
They are, and it's kind of like Indiana basketball. There's just so much drama because they haven't found the success that they've been longing to have from the days of old, and so there's been a lot of comparisons. Even at the beginning of when Mike Woodson was hired, you had a lot of pundits saying what an idiotic hire that was. And now, based on recruiting and off-season stuff, you have people kind of changing their minds. And obviously, we'll find out as basketball season gets underway next week. But the programs are very similar in terms of where they are, I guess, culturally or in relevance, whatever you may call it. But it will be interesting to see because you get Adrian Martinez one more season, don't you?
Well, he can return, whether or not he will.
Okay.
Because he's a senior, but because of that extra year of eligibility, he can come back for 2022.
And so that's kind of what I'm getting at. Scott Frost leaves. I would assume Adrian Martinez, and he may do this whether Scott Frost is here or not. Right. Adrian Martinez might either make the jump to the NFL or see if he can get to the NFL or transfer somewhere else. In that case, you're starting over with a new quarterback. Do you want to do that with Scott Frost, or do you want to do that with somebody else? So you've got a lot of questions there with Nebraska's future.
Yeah, I mean, I just think you're going from basically a rebuilding process to a rebuilding process. And again, there's no indication for certain that it's going to work. So you're going to throw a lot of money at the problem. Again, to me, I would give this one more shot. And if the product looks the same in year 5, then you're going to have to, I mean, they might do it this year. I legitimately don't know, but I would give him one more year because they have been so close. And by the way, before we'll close the book on this, it's not the fact that a lot of people point like they're so close to beating teams like Michigan State, Michigan, Oklahoma. They were close.
That's what I'm saying. Indiana was doing those same things, though, with Kevin Wilson.
That's not the problem. The problem is you lose to Purdue, you lose to Illinois. If you win those 2 games, do the math in my head, they're 5-4, and you need to win one of those games. You need to beat Ohio State, Wisconsin, or Iowa, and you're bowl eligible.
All 3 of those are still tough, but
they are still tough. There's no doubt, but it's a lot easier to win one than it is all 3.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. And as we've seen plenty of times, Indiana puts themselves in that position where they have to get that 6th bowl or 6th game to get bowl eligible against Purdue. And Purdue does the same thing. I don't know that it's going to happen this year because they're on the upside of things. And same with Indiana. Indiana kind of – obviously they've got a big one coming up with Michigan, and it's kind of the same boat as Nebraska. I'm so sick of these Indiana-Nebraska comparisons, but to get to bowl eligibility, the toughest game on their schedule likely is this weekend for both of those teams. So going into your next thing on shooting from the hip before we get fully into Indiana mode, you got PJ Fleck. Man, Riley, it's okay. She is not happy right now.
She needs like a peanut butter or something.
We have a Kong for Lily that she knows that we're talking, or that I'm talking about her now. She can't hear you, obviously, but you can hear her banging around on the on her crate right there. If it gets bad enough, we may take a detour and I may have to take her outside or something, but we'll see what we can do here. But anyway, PJ Fleck, that was your other point in shooting from the hip before we get into Indiana. PJ Fleck, you're saying he would be coach of the year in the Big Ten if it weren't for Mel Tucker stealing the spotlight.
Right now, yeah. I mean, there's no question Mel Tucker's done the best job. I mean, Michigan State's 8-0. They have a Heisman Trophy candidate. They just beat Michigan in incredible fashion. There's no doubt in my mind he's the Big Ten Coach of the Year, especially when you consider what they looked like last year, 2-5, very inconsistent. They were shut out of at least one game, maybe two. I don't remember off the top of my head. But you look at what PJ Fleck has done, and the Bowling Green game looks ugly, but at the same time, they're 6-2. They're in the middle of the Big Ten West race. They lost their top running back, reigning Big Ten running back of the year, Mo Ibrahim, in week 1. After the win against Purdue, they lose Trey Potts, their second-string running back. They just lost their third-string running back, Bryce Williams. We'll see what the rushing attack looks like this week. They have had to play games without Chris Ottman-Bell, without Dalen Wright, without Daniel Jackson. They had Cam Wiley, another running back, hit the transfer portal. They had Curtis Dunlap Jr., who has played a number of snaps, I think had played every game this season. I don't know. I don't remember the number of games he played it for Minnesota, but was a fixture on the offensive line. He hit the transfer portal. I think there was another guy, but I can't remember. The job he has done with his roster management, I guess you could call it, to get this team in a position to win football games. Their schedule has not been difficult. And legitimately, if this team doesn't lose to Bowling Green, I think that PJ Fleck and Mel Tucker we're talking about them in the same sentence. Now, we're only 8 games in. The toughest stretch is still ahead for Minnesota. They still have to play Wisconsin. They still have to play Iowa. They'll have to play Indiana. This week they have Illinois. So they do have a pretty tough final month. Maybe I'll change my mind on that, but I think through the first 8 games, even though they have that loss, that ugly MAC loss, the job PJ Fleck has done has been outstanding.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I mean, he's definitely one of the more eccentric coaches in the Big Ten. He takes a lot of flack, PJ Fleck, for being the way that he is, and I guess Tom Allen to an extent does as well. But PJ Fleck has more of the meat to back it up, and so I definitely agree with you there. We're going to take this might end up being a little funny. We're going to take a pseudo commercial break. Let me see how this comes through real quick. Do you hear this, Dustin?
Elevator music.
Is this the elevator music? Hold on, I'm trying to make it where I can hear to make sure. Yeah. Dun, 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 dun. All right, I'll be right back. We're gonna take the dogs outside, and we're gonna do this as quick as we can. All right, welcome back in. Do what?
That was fast.
Yeah, I was in full sprint mode right there.
I wish we could have had a dash cam or a GoPro on you to clock your speed.
Yeah, it was a very interesting maneuver getting Riley out of the cage, getting Lily out of her pen, and just getting them both outside as quickly as humanly possible. But yeah, that should take care of the whining and moaning, whatever that would have been. But we're back now. Better to get into some Indiana football. A very interesting bright spot right now for this struggling Indiana football team. It comes from the offensive side of things. And I think we covered this a little bit on Indiana Sports Beat, or you did whenever you came on yesterday with Jim. Normally, we have already done our show by the time you come on with Jim, but this is kind of different this week. Donaven McCulley, the true freshman quarterback, 4-star out of Indianapolis, made his presence known in a huge way against Maryland, put up 35 points in his first official start. The problem is the defense didn't hold up there in the bargain, and Maryland ended up winning the game. But Donaven McCulley could be the quarterback of the future for Indiana.
I think he is. And I've mentioned this in the article. I mentioned this on Indiana Sports Beat on Thursday. I think that you have to stick with Donaven McCulley at this point. The offense just looked better. And again, I know that this is against a bad, well, I don't want to call it bad because it's been better than it has in the past, but it's still not good. So we'll call it a suspect. How about that?
Yeah, and he had to rely, at least noticed it early on, he relied a lot on Peyton Hendershot. And I think it's no question that he's been the most reliable receiver for Indiana. He's a big body. He's coming off of, I guess, kind of a disappointing season last year, but the year before he set some records in Indiana. And now he's setting career records for catches for a tight end. And so he's definitely the guy, especially with a struggling Ty Freifogel, Miles Marshall. He's probably the most reliable target for Indiana. And that's going to have to change if Indiana wants to have any semblance of a chance against Michigan.
Well, I don't know. You have to be able to hit your shots down the field, but if you can pick up 4 to 5 yards per play, I mean that's kind of your bread and butter right there. You're not gonna be able to take a ton of deep shots on Michigan, I don't think. Like you're not gonna have a ton of explosive plays against that Michigan defense. Now we did see that Michigan State had some, but there's no question that Michigan State's got way more.
I'll tell you what, too. I just realized I forgot to turn off my little head issue thing. Kenneth Walker was able to do a whole lot more against Michigan than he was against Indiana, and that kind of surprised me.
Yeah, I thought so too. That was interesting to me. I didn't think that he would be able to run on that defense, but he willed them to a victory, and it was some of the things they were doing from an offensive scheme standpoint. It was his toughness. It was his speed. It was impressive to see. It kind of makes you wonder, was this just a determined Kenneth Walker? Did Mel Tucker save something for that game a little bit? It was great to see that, but there's nobody in Indiana's roster I don't think can do that to Michigan's defense.
Yeah. Well, getting back to Indiana, Stephen Carr finally had kind of a breakout run himself against Maryland. It wasn't the most amazing game of his life, more than likely, but at the same time, if Indiana can finally have a semblance of a run game, granted it was against Maryland, and it's the first time that Indiana really played somebody with a fairly, I don't want to say weak defense, but nowhere near the caliber of defenses that they have played all season. So it's hard to really tell how good Indiana is. Actually, let me put it this way. They're not good. The team is having issues. They had expectations. It's hard to tell what their full potential is because there's just been no semblance of consistency. We thought we had seen the consistency on the defensive side of the ball, and now for 2 games in a row, one against Ohio State, which was thought to be an anomaly, but then you do it against a Maryland team who yes, they have some weapons like Talia Tagovailoa, but I'm pretty sure the guy who he was throwing to, Carrier, I think he had 1 catch all season, and he caught like 8 catches for however many yards it may have been. You can't let things like that happen. So the identity of this Indiana team, we've talked about it all season long. It doesn't exist. And I think we've gotten to the point to where they're not going to have an identity unless someone like Donaven McCulley is able to change the game and you start to see some consistency on the offense for these last 4 games.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if you're going to see an identity. To me, at this point, it's just, look, Tom Allen's not throwing in the towel. He still believes this team can get to a bowl game. They're not going to a bowl game. I'm just going to put that out there. The point, though, is to me, it's about reps at this point. Get Donaven McCulley some reps. Going into the big house is going to be really good for him, maybe not on Saturday, but in the future. I think it was really good that he got the start against Maryland, too, because you kind of ease into it, right? You ease into it. Maryland's far from a hostile environment. Wasn't a sold-out crowd. At least I don't think so. Maybe it was. But it's not nearly as hostile.
Oh, it was absolutely not. Just to throw that out there, it was homecoming. It was homecoming, and it was an awful crowd. And this is a Maryland team with a winning record.
They're 5-3. They're one win from bowl eligibility.
I mean, it made me feel bad for all the bad things I had said about Indiana's fan base. I mean, this Maryland, they couldn't care less about their football right now, from what I can see.
Yeah, well, they had come off 3 straight losses to Ohio State or Iowa, Ohio State, and Minnesota, and all of them look pretty ugly. So it'll be interesting to see what they do this week against Penn State. But to the point, I just think that getting him that start, getting him into a comfort level is a good thing. We'll see what that looks like against a much better Michigan defense. But again, at this point, Michael Penix was a statue. Jack Tuttle was a statue at quarterback. Donaven McCulley gives you some mobility. He gives you at least the threat to run the football and maybe not pick up 20 yards, but pick up 5. And that makes a world of difference. And I think that you saw when you have that threat, when you're able to complete passes at a somewhat consistent rate and you're not turning the football over, which was key, no turnovers for him in that game, keeps defenses honest. And then that opened up the run game a little bit. Not great, but a lot better than what we've seen in the previous 7 games.
However many games it's been. But
yeah,
I hate to be doing this. And I used to have to do this back during the Kevin Wilson days, the early days of Tom Allen. But when you get to that point where you kind of know bowl eligibility is out of reach, you start to look ahead to next season. And back to what you were saying about Donaven McCulley, these reps being important. If he's going to be the starter from here on out and likely in the future, you get him ready for this next season because Indiana's schedule next year is a lot more bottom heavy than it is top heavy like it was this past season. Your first 6 games, you got Northwestern at home. Even though it's a Big Ten game, I don't think you could have really a better scenario when you're starting a conference game. Not that Northwestern's going to be a bad team next year. They're always kind of a coin flip. You don't know how good or bad they're going to be. It's definitely a lot better than starting out with an Ohio State and Iowa, Wisconsin, whoever it might be. Right. Then you got your Idaho pushover. You have a home matchup with WKU, who won't have Bailey Zappi next year, I'm pretty sure, who is the guy who has basically been one of the best group of 5 quarterbacks this season. Then you travel to Cincinnati. It's interesting because it's a road game, but it's going to be a way different looking Cincinnati team than you have right now. Desmond Ritter's going to be gone. All these guys who came back for that extra year thanks to COVID, they're all going to be gone. So, and it may not even be coached by Luke Fickell. We don't know what's going to happen with him in the offseason.
Good point.
So if you've got those 4 wins right there, I really hate that I'm doing this, but I am doing it. Then you got at Nebraska. We don't know what that's going to look like, but I've always loved the Indiana-Nebraska matchups. And then home against Maryland and your 7th game at Rutgers. And I hate to call it a cakewalk schedule because it is not a cakewalk because you do have some games that are kind of toss-ups when you sit there and really think about it. But you don't have a single ranked team in your first 7 games. But you follow that, listen to this, with quite a gauntlet to end the season.
Sure.
At Ohio State versus Penn State versus Michigan, at Michigan State, and then obviously the season ender with Purdue in the bucket game. But it's literally like they put all the teams that have been giving Indiana trouble this season, they put them at the exact opposite end of the schedule next year. But back to my point with this. You give Donaven McCulley that many games to figure out who he is, and the competition kind of slowly starts to build. That's what a successful Indiana team needs. Indiana is not built like Ohio State or Michigan, where they need to have all of these marquee matchups to get them going out of the season, because we've obviously seen what that looks like this year. I think Indiana, if they give Donaven McCulley the right start and he doesn't get injured, dear Lord, he can't get injured during these last few games. We can't have another Michael Penix situation. Getting through the end of this season with quality reps, and you're looking to build on what could be a decent season next year.
Yeah, getting through it healthy, and then the ability to run the offense in actual live games in meaningful games. I mean, these games, even though we say Indiana's not going to be bowl eligible, you could, and that's because I don't see them winning 4 games in a row. They could probably beat just about anybody on that schedule, but these are meaningful games. You could upset Michigan and knock them out of the college football playoff in the Big Ten East race. You have Minnesota on the schedule. That's a team that's in the Big Ten West race. You could throw them off. Purdue looking at bowl eligibility. Obviously, that's always a big game. And then against Rutgers, that's the other team. Yep. That's a game. I mean, Rutgers is fighting for bowl eligibility. So Indiana they can kind of turn the table and play spoiler. And I know that wasn't the goal coming into the season, but if you're looking for some sort of motivation, you can have these miniature, I hate to use this phrase because every coach uses it, but you could have a 1-game season where you play spoiler to a couple different teams. And for Donaven McCulley to play these kind of meaningful snaps, meaningful reps, then you springboard into spring ball. Then you springboard into summer and fall camp. And then all of a sudden you have not the most experienced guy, but you have a somewhat seasoned quarterback running your offense. And obviously a lot of it's going to depend on the offensive line and what that looks like and the running back situation and who you got at wide receiver. But, I mean, the offense just typically looks a lot better when you have a pretty good quarterback. And I think that's what we saw last week in College Park, even against a suspect Maryland defense.
Yeah, it's going to be very telling these last 4 games, even if you don't win them all, which you're probably not going to. You may get a couple of them. It's going to be very telling because if they're able to look improve, even if they don't come out with some of these victories, you go into the offseason, into spring with a lot to build on, especially because, as we've hit the nail on so many times already, you have a brand new quarterback who could give you 2 or 3 years. I mean, maybe 4, depending on how things end up going for him. But if you're able to start him that early and that young and build him into a system, I mean, he'll end up being like, and not that Adrian Martinez is a fantastic quarterback, but he'll be a quarterback down the road that other Big Ten teams will be saying, when is he going to be gone?
Yeah, right. I agree.
And that's what you want to build off of that. So that's what you got going on with Indiana, Michigan. I guess we didn't talk too much about Michigan so far, but that's what Indiana has at stake right now.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing to me about Michigan is we talked about Kenneth Walker and how Indiana was able to kind of bottle him up. What was it, like 84 yards on 21 carries or something like that? It was pretty phenomenal considering the circumstances. Indiana hadn't played well. I mean, the defense had played well for most of the season. But this is kind of a different animal. And what I'm really interested to see is how can Indiana contain an offense that has a 2-back system, Blake Corum and Hassan Haskins? They can kind of keep the legs fresh. They can ride the hot hand. And then we just saw last week that Cade McNamara is able to throw the ball. He almost threw for 400 yards, 2 touchdowns and 1 interception, I think.
Now, granted, Michigan State does, and we've talked about this before, a pretty suspect passing defense.
They do, but, I mean, Maryland was.
I'm not trying to get to the point that Indiana did anything to Michigan State's passing defense. That was when they were having their issues, but because obviously that was a totally different situation.
I was going to say Maryland threw the ball all over Indiana, and we saw that.
That's fair. That's why I don't know that I have an answer for what Indiana is, because you think that they're a defensive team, and maybe they just let off the gas the past couple of weeks. They probably knew what they had coming for them with Ohio State, especially after things got away early on. I'm not saying they weren't prepared for Maryland last week, but I'm not sure that they knew that Donaven McCulley was going to be able to keep them in the game from the get-go. I really don't want to feel like I'm giving excuses for this defensive team, but I guess it's probably the way that it's coming across. But they're also coming into this game now knowing that, hey, Donaven McCulley is going to give us a chance to win. Let's fight for this guy. Yeah. So I think you could see we'll get into pick'ems later. I'm not picking Indiana. I don't want to make it. I'm going to go ahead and say that now. I'm not going to be a homer and pick them because I do see myself as a realist. But one thing that I will say, gosh, I'm just giving. I can't not get into what I'm going to say and just say I'll talk about it later after what I've been building up to. But I think Indiana is going to keep this a lot closer than Vegas thinks. That doesn't mean they're going to win, obviously. But I think Donaven McCulley is going to keep taking those steps. I think the defense is going to want to fight for him. And I think that's where you start to see this turnaround. And it's not a season turnaround. The season's out the window. You're preparing for the future at this point.
Well, what's going to be interesting to me about this particular matchup is the one thing that Michigan has struggled with at times this season is playing a full game. Against Rutgers, they were up, I think, 20-3. I'm going to not remember these scores off the top of my head, but basically they had a chance to slam the door on Rutgers, run away with it. They allowed Rutgers to come back, and it was a one-possession game. Rutgers had the ball and a chance to send it to overtime basically on the final drive. They almost lost to Nebraska after having a 13-point lead. They blew that in the second half. They had a 10-point lead against Michigan State, a 16-point lead against Michigan State, blew both of those, and it came back and bit them. And I think, if I remember correctly, there was another. They played poorly in the first half against Northwestern, played poorly in the first half against Washington. So this is a team that has struggled to play a complete 60-minute game. And even when it looks like the game is over, at times they have allowed teams to hang around. So can Indiana take advantage of – that's going to be the interesting thing to me. I don't think that they're going to win, but I do think there is some credence to what you're saying in the fact that I think Indiana's going to hang around. Maybe I think it's going to be like one of those games where Indiana's like down by 2 touchdowns or 10 points, but you never really get the sense that they're going to win, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's Indiana, and that's the thing. They're going to be playing with their backs against the wall. So if they're given a chance late, they're not just going to falter or let Michigan have it because – I mean, if they're really adept about making it to a bowl game, I mean, this is it. You've got to win every game from here on out. And so with your backs against the wall, you're going to get Indiana's 100%. You almost wish if you're Michigan that you were playing them after they were out of the bowl conversation because that's kind of your last bit of fight if you're that concerned about the postseason, which, I mean, Indiana's trying to get to 3 straight and actually win a freaking bowl game. Obviously, like I said, we can talk about that more if Indiana gets the result they want this weekend because things start to look a little more up if that's the case. But that's what I have to say on the matter there.
That's pretty good. I'll go with it.
So we'll go ahead and move on. We'll get we'll go and look at some of the rest of the games here. This isn't going to be an ultra long podcast like some of the more recent ones have been. We'll go ahead and get into what we got. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 Big Ten games this week. So, yeah, it's another full slate, second straight slate of all Big Ten games. That's probably how it's going to be here on out unless you got teams with bye week still, which I'm not sure how many teams.
I think it's next week it's either next week or the week after. I think both Nebraska and Illinois will have a bye because they have an extra week off because of that week 0 game. But I think
that makes sense. So you got – man, and just the records too. Man, it's an uphill climb for me. You went 7-0 last week, undefeated. I did. Yeah, you did. I went 5-2. Obviously, we had 2 differences. You got both of them. You chose, you chose Michigan State. I don't know if you remember, Deb. You chose Michigan State over Michigan, and then you chose Wisconsin over Iowa. Which that's the one in retrospect. I think when you picked it, I knew I wanted to switch, but it was too late. But you were, and I think Jeffrey the Greek probably as well hit the nail on the head with Iowa's offense is just it's awful, it's bad, and
it's not good.
The defense made them look so good early on, and so everything's come to fruition for them right now.
It's basically what Indiana was in 2019, and that is the reason why
2020.
Yes, 2020. Is Indiana was able to create so many turnovers and get great field position that it made their offense look good. I think that's why there was so much hype about this offense coming back. And when you looked at it, when you don't get
you
those
also got to look at
situations, that plays a role.
True. But at the same time, though, Indiana has gotten turnovers this year, and they're not capitalizing. Like I think the best example of last year, the Ohio State game. They're down 35-7, and they still come back because they're. I mean, yes, they turned Justin Fields over 3 times, but you still got to get the ball down the field and score.
Right.
And so, anyway, we're not talking about that right now. We got Week 10 pick'ems. We are going to start with Ohio State, though. Number 5, Ohio State at Nebraska. And as we've kind of harped a lot on Nebraska so far on this episode, but I mean, this is do or die for them. I'm not sure that really makes a difference. It sucks that this is your do or die game and that you've got to cross over with Ohio State. But I definitely think that Ohio State has flaws, and Penn State kind of let that be known last week. I don't think – I mean, we talk about this every time we talk about Nebraska. They don't close out big games. And I don't even know that they're going to be in this late. But even if they were, I don't think Nebraska will be able to pull it out. I'm taking Ohio State.
Yeah, I'll take Ohio State. The interesting thing to me is, I mean, they've lost every game by 1 possession.
Go ahead. I'll let you finish before I say what I saw.
I don't think it's going to be. I say it's not going to be a blowout. It's going to end up being like 55-3. But I legitimately don't think it's going to be a blowout. I think Nebraska. I think it could look a lot like that Michigan-Indiana game we just talked about, where Nebraska hangs around. You never get the sense that they're going to win the game, but I think that you walk away and you feel, even though you're 3-7 and eliminated from bowl eligibility, I think you at least feel a little bit better about the situation because you played a top 5 team so well. Again.
This has been my favorite probably tweet so far from one of your many, and I mean many, Nebraska followers. We've got Meg on Twitter. This is almost 24 hours ago. I feel like every stat I read about the Huskers says they outgained their opponent by 5,000 yards, and the defense allowed an all-time low -12 points, and Nebraska lost the game by 7. It sums it up.
It does
poetically. Poetically.
Yes. Yep. That was perfect.
So, yeah. There we go. We both take Ohio State in that one. Illinois at number 20, Minnesota. It's a game where it's interesting because you have Minnesota, who's looked pretty good as of late, but you also can't forget about the Bowling Green loss. Illinois is not the same as Bowling Green, but Illinois has also been very opportunistic against big-time opponents. Like when they opened the season against Nebraska, they took down Penn State in a 9-overtime game. I mean, this could turn some heads. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if I'm wrong. I'm taking Minnesota, but I'm not sure. What do you think, Dustin?
Well, to me, even though Minnesota is going to be on its 4th string running back and they might have to start running their offensive linemen or linebackers or defensive backs, I still like this rushing attack. And Illinois' defense against the run, against good running teams, I think it ranks 12th in the Big Ten. It's 12th or 13th. So I think that's the difference in the game. I think Illinois hangs around. I don't think Minnesota covers that 15-point spread. So I take the Gophers, but I think it's a close one. I think you see more Tressel ball out of PJ Fleck this week.
The Gophers. Was he – I think I knew this, but I always seem to forget when people mention it. He was under Jim Tressel at Ohio State?
He was a grad assistant for, I think, just 1 season.
Okay. Gotcha. Next up, we have number 21, Wisconsin at Rutgers. Why do I feel like this game already happened? That's a game happening this weekend, right? Wisconsin at Rutgers?
Yep.
Okay. I don't know what's going on in my brain for some reason. I was like, that's not right. This already happened. But nonetheless, we have the Badgers, who was one of my favorite tweets every week, talking about his unenthusiastic stuff in the press conference, Paul Christ. I can't remember what it was, but you had me rolling, talking about – I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and try to explain it. I don't have it in front of me. But you've always got something interesting to say about – well, okay, what was it here?
Well, there was 2 things. One was he always says he's looking forward to a great week of preparation. That's a staple at every Paul Christ press conference. The second thing was he made the craziest comment. It was like, let's see if I can remember this. It was, the best part of the team is the individual. They say there's no I in team. I don't really buy into that. This is paraphrasing. I don't really buy into it. I think the eye is the most important part. You get a lot of individuals from a lot of different places. And then he said, but at the same time, you're playing for something greater, and that's the team. And I'm like, what the hell did I just listen to?
What bush did he just walk around to get to that?
I don't know. I think Ben Kenny is his name, I think, on Twitter. He clipped out the sound. I wrote out the tweet.
I need to check that out. Okay.
But I think his name is Ben. I apologize if I'm getting that name wrong, but I believe that's his name. And he clipped out the 20-second sound of Paul Christ making that comment. It was great.
Wow. Well, not that we've talked about the game with this at all, but I'm taking Wisconsin in this.
I think Wisconsin wins. I think Wisconsin gets a shutout. I don't think Rutgers
shutout.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll call that a shutout.
That should be worth like an extra point that I get back if you're wrong. No,
how many are you down? I'll take that bet.
No, we're not doing that. We haven't done that all season. I'm down 7. I've got a lot of ground to make up, and I'm not sure we'll have any differences in this. We could, though. We got a couple games left. Penn State at Maryland. Actually, this one could be it. I think Maryland's going to be riding the high from last week. Penn State has so much James Franklin drama going on. Maryland's going to capitalize at home. I don't care if there's 3 people in the stands or 30,000 people in the stands. Maryland's taking down Penn State this week.
That's a good pick. If Sean Clifford's still
you're picking Maryland, aren't you?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
If Sean Clifford's at 100%, I still like Penn State. Look, this is a game that, to me, it's kind of Michigan State-esque in the fact that I think Maryland wants this game to be a rivalry, but Penn State is like, this is a little brother type game. Yeah. And after the way the game went last year, I think that Penn State's going to be out to prove a point. So I think the Nittany Lions take care of business.
We'll see. There's a difference. There's an opportunity, probably the only one based on these last. Well, I don't know. We'll see. I need to stop acting like I know what's going to happen.
You should.
Yeah, we got our game of the week still in a few games. We got number 22 at Iowa at Northwestern. I'm trying to wrap this up quickly, man. We got schedules to hit, but we got three more games. Number 22 Iowa at Northwestern. Normally, you would think it should be a great defensive battle, and it might be. But I'm taking the Iowa Hawkeyes in a safe one. I'm
taking Iowa as well. Just run the damn ball because Northwestern can't stop it.
There you go. Next up, a game we've talked about already, Indiana at number 7, Michigan. Our game, obviously. This is an Indiana podcast. Unfortunately, I'm taking Michigan. This will be the game that puts Indiana out of bowl eligibility. And at that point, you're fighting to play spoiler. You're fighting to – we've hit every nail on the head on what's next for Indiana if this doesn't work out in their favor. But I've got Michigan.
I'm taking Michigan as well.
Here we go. One more game of the week. We haven't even talked about it other than the fact that we brought up Mel Tucker earlier. Number 3, Michigan State at Purdue. And Purdue is such a weird team. I mean, they take down number 2 Iowa. They beat Ohio State a couple years ago during one of their great runs. It just seems like a trap game for Michigan State. I know Mel Tucker's kind of avoiding that, which obviously every coach wants to say that nothing's a trap game. They want to have their focus on the next opponent. It's a college football cliche. But, I mean, Purdue, Jeff Brom and his squad, they know they can win this game, obviously. There's no doubt about that. It's just a matter of will they. Dustin?
Purdue has struggled against teams that are better defensively. You look at the loss to Notre Dame, you look at the loss to Wisconsin, the loss to Minnesota, those teams are pretty good defensively. Michigan State is okay defensively. What did we talk about Michigan State? Cannot defend the pass. What does Purdue love to do? Throw the football around the field. I like that Purdue gets them in West Lafayette a week after Michigan State comes off an emotional big game.
A week before a big matchup with Penn State.
And I think Purdue gets a second top 5 win this season. I'm picking the Boilermakers to upset the Spartans. I still think Michigan State is in good shape. I still think they can challenge Ohio State. This is more to me the schedule standpoint, the matchup standpoint. Purdue's got a lot to fight for. They're not probably they're probably out of the Big Ten West race because of the losses to Minnesota and Wisconsin. But bowl eligibility, you could potentially you look at Ohio, you got Northwestern and Indiana still ahead. This is the team that could win 8 games. I think Purdue can not shut down Kenneth Walker. I think they can slow him down. I think the Boilermakers get an upset. I think it's like, and I'll give you a score. I think it's going to be something like 22 to not to like 20, like something wonky, some sort of weird score.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And yeah, I haven't given my pick yet. I'm taking Michigan State, but I think you've summed up the kind of game that it could be to a T. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens. Being an Indiana fan, yeah, I don't like seeing Purdue be successful, but at the same time, it's kind of cool the way that they seem to play spoiler for all these teams and still be relevant. They're going to be 6-3 if they win this game. But that'll wrap it up for this week in Indiana football. Thanks for being patient with us this week. Taking forever to get this one out. We'll see if we can get back on a better schedule next week. Be sure to listen to Indiana Sports Beat Radio Monday through Friday. We got plenty of football and basketball coverage there every day. So there you go. Thanks again. Thanks, Dustin, and we'll see you next time.